The wind came down from the high ridges in restless currents combing through the yellow grass and rattling the silver leaves of cottonwoods along the dry creek. Near noon, the light had that bleached, honest quality that refused to flatter anything. It showed the dust on boots, the cracks in wagon boards, the tiredness that gathers in the corners of a settler's eyes. Evelyn Harrow stood in the center of it, with a coil of hemp rope over her shoulder and a length of iron splicing rod in her gloved hand, considering the angle of a telegraph pole that had decided sometime in the night to lean like an old drunk. The wire between posts sagged in a tired smile. The message drum in her saddlebag held 3 urgent slips for the county seat, and if she did not lift this wire, the county would not hear them until tomorrow. By tomorrow, small troubles in these parts had a way of turning into large ones. She had cut her dark hair blunt to the shoulder last spring because it kept catching on cross arms. Dust clung to the sweat at her temple in pale crescents. One knee of her canvas skirt bore a patch shaped like a crooked star. Her father would have teased her for that patch, and for the fact she was 30 miles from the nearest town, with only a red gelding and a deadfall jack to help. Then he would have nodded once and said, "Good. You chose the hard road like you were born to do." He had been a railroad engineer who believed in straight lines drawn deep into wilderness until they became roads for everyone else. The winter he died, she sold what was left of their tools and bought a share in the isolated telegraph spur that ran from Dry Willow Station to Miller's Fork. Messages meant money, and money meant choosing your own life. That was the arithmetic she trusted. She wedged the iron foot of the jack against the sheep-chewed earth and tested the pole. The wood made a tired sound in its core, a whisper of rot that said the problem was not the wind at all, but time. She set her jaw and let the weight of her body become leverage. The pole came up an inch. The wire shivered, whispered its thin metallic syllable. A grasshopper flicked past her boot in a small burst of green life. She laughed once under her breath because even the smallest things insisted on moving. The horse lifted his head ears forward. The change in him reached her skin before the sound did. She was already turning when the hoofbeats slid into the day like a handful of stones rolled across a table. Not a stampede. Not a lone rider either. 2, maybe 3. Evelyn's mouth dried by habit, then steadied the way it always did, because fear was a tool too when you put it to work. She laid the splicing rod lengthwise along the wagon slat and reached for the lever action rifle under the seat. She did not throw it to her shoulder. She let the weight of it be a visible fact by her hip. The first rider came into view at the bend where the cottonwoods narrowed the creek. A big man on a blue roan hat pulled low dust on his coat. The second was leaner, riding a sorrel, scanning the ground like it owed him a favor. They slowed when they saw the wire and the wagon and the woman standing between both. The big man raised his hand palm out, a gesture shaped like a bridge. His voice was low and even when it carried to her. "We are not here for trouble, miss. We are looking for a span of cut wire and a set of men who do not pay for what they take. Did you see riders pass before noon?" Evelyn let herself breathe. Her finger never touched the trigger, but she did not set the rifle aside. Behind the men, the road was empty, the grass leaning in the wind like a congregation listening. "I have only seen my own tracks in the shadow of this pole," she said. "But I can tell you your men are headed for the broken notch if they are clever. Wind lifts there, and you can ride without leaving much of a print. The back trail holds softer ground." The lean rider studied her eyes, the washed green of river stones. "You speak like a tracker." "I speak like someone who invested in a wire that must carry messages," she answered. "Cut wire is bad for my arithmetic." The big man's mouth crooked at that. "Name is Reed Calder," he said, touching his hat brim. "I keep a ranch east of Dry Willow and wear the sheriff's star when no one else will. This here is Joel Tanner. We heard your name last market day. Folks say the Harrow woman keeps the line talking when weather and men try to shut it up." "Folks say a lot of things," Evelyn replied. "Which part do you believe?" "The part about the work being done," he said. "The rest is for coffee and benches." He swung down from the saddle in a single smooth motion that spoke of years spent letting his body answer questions before his mind had to. Up close, she saw a thin white line through his left eyebrow, an old cut that had healed into a permanent mark of decision. The badge was not on his chest but in his saddlebags if he truly wore one. Men who had to show a star to be believed tended to keep the star polished. Men who did not had other ways of being believed. "Do you mind if I have a look at your pole, Miss Harrow?" he asked. "Joel ride the bend and see if anything chewed the bank last night." Evelyn stepped aside the space of a hand. The refusal that had already formed in her mouth rewrote itself into something like a test. He laid his palm against the pole, pressed, listened, then set his shoulder in the right place without asking. The jack took the weight. The wood groaned again, not in a way that was defeat, but in a way that announced a problem that could be named. He did not look at her to see if she was impressed. He watched the wire for the tremor that meant tension and distance and the good luck of stretch. "Rot at the base," he said. "5 inches of bad heartwood, maybe 6. You can brace it, but it will make a liar of you after the first big rain. There is a cedar snag up the draw that will serve. Joel and I can help you swap it if you are not too proud to accept a neighbor's hand." Evelyn felt the reflex in her bones, the one that rose whenever someone framed help as a question of pride. She smothered it. Pride was expensive in the West when it wore the wrong clothes. Usefulness was cheap and saved you twice. She nodded once. "I am not too proud, Sheriff Calder, but you should know I keep score. I pay my debts in cash or by returning labor." "Good," he said, and something almost like relief crossed his face so quickly she was not sure it had been there. "Then let us deal fair." Joel. The lean rider had returned on a whisper of dust. "Fresh sign on the far bank," he said. 3 riders, 1 horse casting a shoe. Headed for the notch, like the lady said. Evelyn set the rifle in the wagon and pulled a coil of wire. While the men cut the cedar snag, she measured, marked, and made fast what she could. They worked without wasted talk. Joel had a gift for balance, holding weight at the exact height a heartbeat longer than seemed possible. Reed was strong in the way that did not announce itself until you noticed he had been lifting the wrong end of things on purpose so other people could breathe. When the wire climbed to its proper hum and the cedar stood honest in the soil, Evelyn tied the line with a neat splice that would hold through wind and worry both. She wiped her forehead with the back of her glove and studied their work. It was not beautiful in the way of carvings or needlework, but it had the beauty of rightness, which was the only beauty that mattered to a rotor rail of wire. Reed looked at her splice and made a small sound that might have been respect. "Messages will go through," he said. "How far are you running them today?" "To the county seat," she answered. 3 slips, one about taxes no one wants, one about a calf sale everyone wants, and one from a woman asking after a brother who did not come home last week. "People think this line is for business," Joel said. "Most days the only thing that matters on it is somebody finding out they are not alone." Evelyn glanced at him, surprised into a quick smile. "You almost sound like a pastor." "I sound like a man whose sister once waited too long for news," Joel replied. And then the quiet folded around them again, more comfortable now that it had been honest once. Reed took up his reins. "We thank you for the road wisdom, Miss Harrow. If these men cut your wire again, we will leave them a lesson where they can read it. We will ride the notch and see whether trouble learned to spell its own name." She nodded, then spoke before the choice to stay silent could harden. "If you are down a rider at dusk and the notch has taken what it likes to take, there is a spring on the lee side of the Twin Buttes. Drink there. A man can make a bad choice when his mouth is dry." He squinted toward the buttes, then back at her. "That is the kind of map a person only gives once she has decided whether to trust the traveler." "I did not say I trust you," Evelyn answered. "I said I prefer that men who call themselves sheriffs do not die of thirst on my account. It makes the papers dramatic and the messages heavy." His smile touched the scar through his eyebrow and became something unguarded for the length of a breath. Then he sobered, tipped his hat brim, and the 2 men turned their horses toward the ragged mouth of land that some surveyor had once written down as a notch, and every child in the county simply called the cut. Dust lifted from their horses' hocks, hung in the light, and was taken apart by the wind like anything else that tried to keep its shape too long out here. When they had gone, the world came back to itself. The wire sang, the grass spoke its many small names. The horse snorted and went to cropping what little green lingered near the creek. Evelyn took the message drum from her saddlebag, unlatched the brass lip, and fed the first slip into the clamp. Her fingers were sure. The key clicked, and the line carried her small, precise noise into distance. A miles-long room opened, and in it people leaned closer to each other without moving. She thought of Reed Calder's steady hand on the cedar, of Joel's quick balance, of the way the blue roan had stood quiet as if it had already learned patience. She thought of her father's voice saying, Good the hard road is the honest one. When the last slip rode the wire, the sun had tilted a little, and the shadow of the new pole lay straighter than the old one could remember. Evelyn packed the jack, coiled the rope, and checked the cinch out of habit. The day had more work in it yet. A rider's dust showed at the far bend again, but this time it was only a boy with a sack of letters and a grin too big for his face. The county kept moving, and the wire kept speaking, and Evelyn Harrow swung into the saddle, because choosing her life meant riding ahead to meet it where the road turned. The boy's dust had not yet settled when Evelyn pushed her gelding into a long trot across the flats. The road toward Miller's Fork stretched thin as an old scar barely more than a wagon track wandering between stands of sage and rock outcrops shaped by centuries of wind. She kept her eyes on the horizon where the land lifted into low ridges, their outlines blurred by heat shimmer. Each ridge was a threshold, each valley a pocket that might hold friend, stranger, or trouble. The West did not permit anyone to travel empty of watchfulness. Her saddlebags clicked with the weight of messages. The county paid a cent per mile per slip, hardly riches, but enough to keep oats in the bin and oil on the gears of her small telegraph station. She measured days not in hours but in distances crossed and wires kept alive. It was a discipline that kept loneliness from turning into something heavier. The wire hummed beside her like a companion, with one song and many verses. By mid-afternoon, the sun was blunt on her shoulders. She paused at a windmill near the half-collapsed barn of the Davenport claim, letting the gelding drink from the trough. The farmstead had been abandoned after a fire 2 winters ago, but the well still gave water. As she filled her own canteen, she felt again that prickle on the back of her neck, the warning sense that had saved her more than once. Hoofbeats faint but deliberate. She capped the canteen, slowly slid it into the saddlebag, and laid her palm on the rifle without drawing it. She listened. A single rider this time. When he appeared over the rise, she knew him before his shadow lengthened. Reed Calder, the big man, reined in his blue roan, raising 2 fingers in a greeting that was neither casual nor urgent. Dust coated his coat, and the crease between his brows told her the notch had not delivered anything easy. She waited until he was close enough for his words to carry. "Trouble found," he said simply. "Joel's following the tracks. I came to send a wire from your station." His eyes moved to the empty barn, the leaning windmill, the ghost of a home. "But it seems I found you first." Evelyn studied his face. Sweat carved tracks through the dust. The scar in his brow looked deeper in the bright light. "What kind of trouble?" she asked. "Reeves," he answered, "and 3 more wearing his mark." They cut the wire again 2 miles north of the notch, left it trailing like entrails. "Joel figures they want the town deaf. A blindfold makes it easier for thieves to move." Her jaw set. She thought of the slips in her saddlebag, the fragile trust people put in words carried by a line of copper. "Then we ride," she said. "My station is 6 miles east. I have spares insulators, new wire. If they want the town blind, we'll give it sight again." For a long moment he just looked at her as if weighing whether to argue. Then he nodded once. "We ride." They rode side by side, the gelding and the blue roan, keeping an easy rhythm across the open flats. Conversation came in fits and starts between hoofbeats. He told her Joel had spotted the gang heading toward an old mining road that cut behind the buttes. Evelyn spoke of the way the wire carried more than business, that sometimes it was a lifeline when families waited for word. Their words were practical, but beneath each syllable ran a current neither named an awareness that they were no longer strangers linked only by a broken pole. By the time the squat shape of her telegraph shack appeared low, roof smoke, black chimney, small corral, the shadows had stretched longer across the land. Evelyn swung down first, boots crunching on gravel. She unlocked the door and motioned him inside. The air smelled of oil paper and iron filings. On the desk sat the brass key, polished smooth by years of her father's hands before it became hers. Reed removed his hat, turning it once in his large hands before setting it on the peg. The gesture had something of respect in it, as though he recognized the shack was not merely boards and nails, but a covenant between her and the wide land. He stood awkward for a breath, then said, "Send your word, Miss Harrow. Tell the town to bar its doors until the gang is dealt with." She sat at the desk, fingers poised above the key, but before tapping the message, she looked up. "And what of you, Sheriff Calder? Do you expect me to send word?" "You will ride alone into the notch." "Not alone," he said quietly. Joel will be there. And if you are willing, his gaze held hers steady as iron. Sometimes a line needs more than wire to stay alive. Sometimes it needs someone too stubborn to let it fall. Evelyn felt the room tilt slightly, though the shack was steady. She heard her father's voice again, the echo of his creed about hard roads. She had chosen the line because it gave her independence. Yet here was a man asking her to choose again, for the line, for the town, perhaps, for something she could not name yet. She tapped the brass key, sending the first urgent syllables into the wire, her hand steady, her heart less so. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the promise of night and whatever waited in the cut. The wire carried her warning into distance, and Evelyn felt the shack exhale when the last click faded. She leaned back, rubbing her eyes, and listened to the silence settle again. Outside, Reed's boots crunched as he paced the narrow yard. When she stepped into the late light, he was leaning against the corral rail, the blue roan flicking flies with its tail. He looked up at her, the scar in his brow softened by weariness. "Town will be ready," she said. "Good," he replied. "But readiness doesn't mend cut wire." Joel's shadowing them along the mining road. "If they mean to strike again, we need to catch them before they decide Silver Creek's worth bleeding." The mention of the town, its children, its crooked main street, the schoolhouse not yet painted made her chest ache in a way she didn't expect. She had chosen solitude wires and wind for company, yet she felt the tug of responsibility, as if every message tapped at her station bound her more tightly to the people who depended on it. "I'll ride with you," she heard herself say. Reed's head tilted. "That wasn't what I asked." "Maybe not," she said evenly. "But it's the answer. I won't sit here waiting for news of more broken poles. This line is mine. If they mean to strangle it, I'll stand where they swing the rope." For a moment, the air between them was taut as the wire they both served. Then Reed nodded once, a decision heavy as iron. "Saddle up, then. We'll ride until dark, camp near the notch, meet Joel at dawn." The road narrowed into shale and juniper scrub. Shadows deepened, stretching long fingers over the land. Evelyn rode with her rifle tied to the saddle horn, the message drum secure at her side. She watched Reed's back, broad and steady, moving with the easy balance of a man who had long ago made peace with horses and hard ground. They stopped at a shallow arroyo where water whispered faintly. Reed unsaddled the roan and spread a bedroll, with movements efficient and wordless. Evelyn built a small fire, striking sparks that leapt like insects before catching on dry grass. Soon the glow softened the edges of night. For a while they ate in silence. Jerked beef, hard bread, a flask of water passed between them. The quiet wasn't unfriendly. It was the kind of quiet that let thoughts walk where they wished. Finally, Reed spoke. "When I first took the star," he said, gaze fixed on the flames, "I thought law meant pointing a gun straighter than the next man. Turns out law is mostly standing between people in the dark, even when you can't see much yourself." Evelyn studied him in the shifting light. "And do you see anything now?" He poked at the fire with a stick, sparks climbing skyward. "I see a woman who rides into danger, not because she seeks it, but because she refuses to let others silence her work. I see someone who's chosen the hard road so many times it's become her home." His eyes lifted to hers, green even in firelight. "Makes me wonder if I've been walking the same road without knowing it." She felt the heat rise in her face, though whether from fire or his words she couldn't tell. "Roads cross for a reason," she said softly. The night thickened around them. Coyotes sang somewhere, far off, a braided note of hunger and persistence. Evelyn lay awake long after Reed's breathing deepened into sleep, staring at the arc of stars wheeling overhead. She thought of the wire stretched across valleys carrying voices in the dark. She thought of Reed's scar, the weight of his quiet, the way his presence made the emptiness less vast. Dawn came pale and sharp. Joel emerged from the notch like a shadow peeled off stone horse, lathered eyes narrow. "They're camped half a mile up," he reported. "4 men, 3 rifles, 1 with a limp. They've got spools of cut wire. Looks like they mean to keep Silver Creek silent until they take what they want." Reed glanced at Evelyn. She met his eyes steady. "Then let's give them a message worth hearing." The canyon narrowed until it swallowed sound. Reed moved like a man born to ambushes, silent, patient. Joel flanked left, weaving between rocks. Evelyn kept low behind a stand of mesquite rifle, braced heart hammering in her throat. The outlaws' camp reeked of tobacco and unwashed cloth. Reels of copper wire lay scattered like trophies. Reeves himself sat by the fire, long coat draped over his shoulders, hat tipped low. When he lifted his head, the grin beneath was sharp as broken glass. Blackwell's lawman, Reeves drawled, and his shadows. I wondered how long before you come sniffing. Brought a lady this time. Careful sheriff women out here break faster than wire. Evelyn's hands tightened on the rifle, but she held her ground. Her voice rang clear across the camp. Funny thing about wire, it bends, it sings, and when it's mended, it carries farther than any bullet. Reeves laughed, but there was an edge in it. We'll see whose song lasts. The air snapped taut. Rifles lifted, the smell of powder just a breath away. And then everything broke loose. Gunfire cracked through the canyon like thunder caught in stone. Smoke curled upward, sharp and acrid, stinging Evelyn's eyes as she sighted along her rifle. She fired once, the recoil punching her shoulder, and saw a bandit dive for cover behind a crate of stolen wire. Reed's revolver barked in answer. Each shot, measured deliberate, meant not for noise, but for consequence. Joel's lean silhouette moved ghost-like along the rock's flank fire, pinning their enemies from the side. Reeves shouted curses, his voice jagged with fury. Hold your ground, boys. It's 3 against 4, and one of them's a woman. Evelyn's jaw clenched. She chambered another round, steady hands, betraying none of the storm beating in her chest. She fired again. Splinters flew from Reeves's cover, forcing him lower. You'll find this woman steadier than most men, she called, her voice carrying clear across the dust. A sudden rush of hoofbeats split the din. One outlaw scrambled onto his horse, spurring it toward the canyon mouth. Joel rose from his position, firing twice. The rider pitched sideways, horse bolting, riderless into scrub. Evelyn swallowed hard but kept her sight fixed forward. She had chosen this fight, and choices had weight. Reeves lunged up, revolver in hand. He fired wild one shot, sparking against stone inches from Evelyn's head. Before he could fire again, Reed strode into the open calm as iron revolver raised. His voice was steady, cold. Drop it, Reeves, the outlaw sneered. Still playing sheriff without a badge pinned to your chest? You think folks out here care about your word? They care about whose hand steadies the line, Reed answered. You cut it, once you'll never cut it again. For a breath, time held. Reeves's finger tightened on the trigger. Evelyn felt the world narrow to that single twitch. Then her own rifle cracked. The bullet struck Reeves's revolver, shattering its cylinder into shards of metal. The weapon fell useless from his hand, clattering on rock. Silence slammed down after the echo. The remaining bandits froze, eyes wide, courage evaporating in the dust. Joel stepped into view, rifle aim, voice flat. Lay it down. All of it. Slowly, resentfully, the 2 surviving men dropped their guns. Reeves cradled his ruined hand, eyes burning hate into Evelyn. You'll regret that shot, schoolmarm, he spat. The West doesn't keep room for women who forget their place. Evelyn met his gaze, blue eyes hard as cut glass. My place is wherever I choose to stand. And today I stand between you and this town. They bound the outlaws with rawhide lashings scavenged from the camp, their curses muffled under the scrape of rope. Joel gathered the reels of copper wire, stacking them, neat as evidence. Reed stood watch, revolver easy in his hand, but eyes never leaving Reeves. When the work was done, Reed turned to Evelyn. Smoke smudged her cheek, her braid half loosened, but her hands were steady as she wiped her rifle clean. That was a fine shot, he said quietly. You saved my life. She looked at him, breath still uneven from the fight. I didn't think. I just knew I couldn't let him pull that trigger. Thinking's overrated when your aim's true, Joel muttered, but there was a flicker of admiration in his tone. They led the prisoners out of the canyon, the wire spools rattling in the wagon they'd reclaimed. The trail back towards Silver Creek stretched long and gray beneath the late sun. Townsfolk would be waiting, worried faces hungry for news, for proof the law still held some teeth. As twilight bled across the horizon, the 3 riders approached Silver Creek's outskirts. Word traveled faster than hooves. By the time they reached Main Street, lanterns flared in windows and townsfolk poured into the road. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Men raised lanterns, high eyes fixed on the bound figure stumbling behind the wagon. A murmur ran through the crowd like wind through grass. Reeves. Caught. Mayor Hollister stepped forward, relief plain on his face. Sheriff Calder, he said, voice loud enough for all to hear. You've brought us a victory. Reed dismounted, dust falling from his coat. Not me alone, he answered. Joel held the flank. And Miss Harrow, his eyes sought Evelyn's. She stood when it mattered most. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn felt their stares, some awed, some doubtful. She lifted her chin, refusing to shrink beneath their judgment. The line must carry, she said simply. If we let fear cut it, then we've already lost. Silence followed, then a slow swell of applause, hesitant at first but gathering strength. Mothers nodded. Men doffed hats. Children cheered, voices thin but bright. Evelyn felt the weight of their recognition settle on her shoulders. Not a burden but a mantle. Reed stepped closer, low enough only she could hear. You proved today you're not just keeper of wire, Evelyn. You're keeper of this town's voice. She turned toward him, the firelight from lanterns catching the green in his eyes. And what of you, Sheriff? Where do you stand in all this? His mouth curved in a tired, genuine smile. Beside you, if you'll have me. The night closed in warm around them, filled with noise and relief. Yet beneath it all, Evelyn felt the quiet thread pulling tighter between her and the man who had walked into gunfire with her. The wire might hum across the valleys, but something deeper now carried between them, stronger, unbroken, waiting to see how far it would reach. The jailhouse smelled of iron lamp oil and men who had lost their freedom. Reeves sat on the narrow cot with his injured hand bound in rough, linen green eyes, glittering beneath a bruised brow. The bars between him and the town creaked faintly whenever he leaned close, as if they too resented his weight. Silver Creek gathered outside in knots of curiosity and anger. Mothers who remembered his raids, ranchers who had lost stock, merchants who had paid for silence, all crowded the dusty street. Their murmurs rose like a restless wind. Mayor Hollister dabbed his forehead with a kerchief voice, strained as he addressed the crowd. The territorial judge is 3 weeks away. Until then, these men will be held here. Silver Creek must remember justice is not revenge. The words did little to ease the temper of men who had lived too long with fear. Someone shouted, "String him up now." Another answered, "Burn the gang's camp." The crowd pressed forward, and for a moment Evelyn thought the jail might fall to its own people. Then Reed Calder stepped onto the porch, revolver, holstered but presence sharp as steel. Any man here who thinks he'll serve justice better than a court can step forward. Now, he said, his voice cut the noise cleanly. But know this, if we hang him without trial, we become no better than the men we claim to despise. The silence that followed was hard, resentful, but silence it was. Slowly the crowd dispersed, some muttering, some still glaring. Order held for now. Inside, Evelyn waited back, straight against the wall. She had stayed not because Reed asked, but because something in her refused to leave the line half-finished. Reeves watched her lips curling. The school marm who shoots guns out of men's hands, he mocked. Do you think the town will keep you once they see you've got more fire than they bargained for men here? Don't like women outshining them. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Then they'll have to get used to the light. His laugh was low and bitter. You'll burn yourself before long. She turned away, unwilling to give him more of her time. Outside, Reed fell into step beside her as she left the jail. He's not wrong, he murmured. Some men in town will bristle at what you did today, but others, he paused, eyes on. Her others will see it as proof this place can grow. She exhaled, the tension of the day coiling in her chest. I didn't ask for their approval. No, he agreed, but you earned their respect. Days passed. Autumn deepened, painting the hills in rust and gold. Reeves and his men remained caged, watched night and day by deputies. Silver Creek, though restless, began to breathe easier. Children returned to school with less fear in their eyes, and merchants reopened ledgers with cautious hope. Evelyn found her classroom fuller than ever. Parents who once hesitated now urged their children toward the desk rows, trusting the woman who had stood against outlaws with the same steadiness she gave to letters and sums. She spoke of arithmetic as the measure of fairness of history, as the lesson of consequence of reading, as the doorway no one could lock. The children listened, as if words might shield them like walls of stone. In the evenings, Reed often appeared at the edge of her lamplight, sometimes with a sack of apples, sometimes with a quiet story of the day's patrol. They spoke less of danger now and more of small things, the stubbornness of his cattle, the progress of her pupils, the way the wire still hummed even after the canyon fight. One night, as frost silvered the window panes, he lingered longer than usual. When my father built our ranch, he said he told me the land is a mirror. It shows you what you give it, patience or neglect. I think towns are the same. He glanced at her, expression almost shy. You've given Silver Creek more than it knew it needed. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her despite the chill. And what have you given it, Sheriff? His mouth curved. A steady hand, maybe. But lately I've been thinking, it might be time to give it a future, not just a defense. Before she could ask what he meant, the bell of the telegraph clicked sharp and urgent from her desk. She crossed the room, swiftly translating the staccato beats into words. Her face tightened. There's been another raid, she whispered. Not Reeves, someone else. Wagons struck near the river road. Reed's eyes darkened. Outlaws breed like weeds. Cut one root, another rises. He reached for his hat. But we'll answer. We always answer. He hesitated at the door, turning back once. Will you keep the line steady while we ride? Evelyn lifted her chin. The line will hold. And when you return, I'll be here. The promise in those words was more than duty. It was a thread binding them both, strong as copper, unbroken in the dark. The river road wound low between cottonwoods, their bare branches rattling like bones in the cold wind. By the time Reed and his deputies reached the scene, dusk had painted the water bronze. 2 wagons lay overturned in the shallows, barrels split flour soaking into mud. Families huddled on the bank, faces pale from fear and exhaustion. Reed swung down, boots splashing, and knelt beside an old man clutching his arm. They came fast, the man stammered. Masks, rifles. Took what they could and rode north. Reed's jaw tightened. How many? 5, maybe 6. He rose, eyes scanning the tracks, gouged deep in the riverbank. They were fresh, an hour, no more. Joel dismounted beside him, studying the sign. Headed toward Black Mesa, he murmured. Rough country. Good place to vanish. Reed glanced at the frightened families. Get them back to town, he ordered 2 deputies. The rest of us ride. We end this before it spreads. Back in Silver Creek, Evelyn received the hurried message through the wire raiders on River Road. Sheriff in pursuit. She tapped back confirmation, her fingers brisk though her pulse raced. She imagined Reed's tall figure disappearing into the gathering dark, and the room suddenly felt too small. The children noticed her distraction the next morning. James Wilson, sharp-eyed at 14, asked, Miss Harrow, will the sheriff bring them back safe? She hesitated only a breath. He will, she said firmly. But Silver Creek isn't guarded by one man alone. It's guarded by all of us, by every lesson you learn, every promise we keep. She wrote community on the blackboard in bold chalk. Do you know what this means? She asked. Hands shot up, voices offering fragments. Neighbors helping, standing together. Evelyn smiled. Yes, it means none of us is left to face the dark alone. Miles away, Reed and Joel tracked the raiders into the mesa. The land here was broken gullies, twisting like scars. Boulders stacked high as fortress walls. Stars emerged one by one, cold and sharp. The riders ahead had split their trail, trying to confuse pursuit, but Reed knew the land. He followed the signs that others would have missed, a broken twig. A stone turned wrong, the faint scuff of a horse's stumble. At midnight, they found the raiders' camp tucked in a ravine. Stolen barrels formed a barricade firelight, painting cruel shadows. Reed counted 6 men, rough-looking, armed, restless. One laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh that covered fear. Joel leaned close. We could wait for dawn, call for more men. Reed shook his head. By dawn, they'll be gone, and Silver Creek will bleed again. He studied the fire, his scar catching starlight. We end it tonight. Back in town, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She paced the telegraph shack, listening to the wire's faint hum, like a heartbeat stretched thin across miles. Finally, she sat at the desk and opened the leather journal Reed had once teased her about keeping. By lamplight, she wrote, the West asks more of us than we think we can give. Yet when we answer, it gives us back something larger than ourselves. Tonight I fear for him, but I also believe in him. Belief is its own kind of armor. In the ravine, Reed signaled Joel forward. Shadows wrapped them close as they moved between rocks, each step measured. The raiders' laughter grew louder with drink. One stumbled to his feet, wandering toward the brush. Reed pressed against, stone breath, held. The man passed within yards, never seeing. When Reed struck, it was swift, precise, a shout. A gun knocked aside chaos, tearing through the camp. Joel's rifle cracked, firelight flaring against his lean silhouette. Reed moved like the land itself, deliberate, unstoppable. 2 raiders fled into darkness. 3 fell. The last surrendered, hands shaking above his head. Smoke stung Reed's lungs as the fire scattered sparks into the cold sky. He bound the prisoner with rawhide and kicked dirt over the flames. Joel's breath steamed in the night. It's done. Reed looked toward the horizon where somewhere beyond a wire carried words back to a woman waiting. No, he said quietly. It's only begun, because men like these don't come unless something's broken deeper than wire. Dawn found Silver Creek restless. The wire clicked with Reed's report gang scattered. Supplies recovered. One captive. Returning by nightfall. Evelyn copied the words onto a slip, pinned it by the schoolhouse door where the town could see. Relief rippled through the crowd like a thaw. That evening when hoofbeats finally echoed down Main Street, Evelyn was among the first to step forward. Reed dismounted, dust and smoke still on his coat. His eyes found hers immediately, the weariness in them softened by something warmer. The line held, she told him, voice steady despite the rush in her chest. I knew it would, he answered, because you held it. Their words were plain, but the silence between them carried everything unspoken, the danger they'd shared, the trust earned, the thread drawing tighter each day. Snow came early that year, drifting down from the high ridges, and whitening Silver Creek before November was half through. The town took it as both blessing and burden. Wells filled but trails iced, overslowing every wagon. Children pressed hands to frosted windows, eager for the season's first sleigh rides, while ranchers muttered about thin grazing and cattle lost in storm gullies. Evelyn Harrow walked the short distance from her schoolhouse to the telegraph shack, with her shawl wrapped tight, boots crunching on the crusted snow. Inside, the wire hummed faintly, still alive, still carrying. She brushed frost from the desk, lit the stove, and fed the line its first message of the morning. Each click was a promise, the town's voice reaching outward, refusing silence. Reed called her, stopped by often now, sometimes with reports from patrols, sometimes with nothing more than a sack of apples or a quiet look that lingered too long. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Silver Creek noticed everything. Whispers filled the general store, and the church pews speculation, twisting between approval and suspicion. Evelyn held her chin high through it all. She had faced gunfire. Gossip was just another kind of noise. One Sunday after service, Mayor Hollister called her aside. Miss Harrow, he said, voice careful, the council's grateful for all you've done. But some wonder if your closeness with Sheriff Calder may stir division. Evelyn met his eyes evenly. Division comes from fear, Mayor. Reed and I stand on the same ground. If that unsettles people, perhaps it's the ground that needs shifting. The mayor flushed, then nodded, half chastened. Word of her answer spread, and within days even the whispers quieted. Respect once earned with rifle smoke and chalk dust proved harder to uproot than doubt. Christmas arrived with clear skies and brittle cold. The townsfolk crowded into the schoolhouse, now bright with evergreen boughs and candles. Evelyn's students performed a pageant of the nativity voices, high and earnest mistakes forgiven with laughter. When the children bowed, applause thundered loud enough to rattle the windows. Reed stood at the back, arms folded, watching her more than the stage. Afterward, as families lingered over sweetbread and cider, he approached a small parcel in his hand. For you, he said gruffly. Inside lay a compass brass polished to a warm glow. On its lid was engraved a single word, true. Her throat tightened. Because you don't want me lost, she asked softly. Because you never are, he replied. That night, walking her home under a sky sharp with stars, he stopped at the schoolhouse steps. Breath clouded between them. Evelyn, he said, voice low, I've spent years holding this town steady. But since you came, it feels like steadiness means more than keeping trouble out. It means building something worth defending together. She searched his face, the scar in his brow, the green eyes unguarded in the starlight. Are you asking me to build with you, Reed? He nodded once, the smallest movement, but waited with everything unsaid. A home, a life, a future that belongs to both of us. For a moment she stood silent, listening to her own heart hammer, like the wires pulse through winter air. Then she placed her gloved hand over his. Yes, she whispered. Together. Spring broke the valley open with thawed streams and hillsides green again. Silver Creek prepared for its first territorial fair, banners strung across Main Street, wagons arriving heavy with goods. The school children rehearsed songs and recitations. Ranchers polished harnesses for parade. In the midst of it all, Reed and Evelyn stood before the church altar. The town gathered close. She wore a simple gown of ivory wool hair crowned with wildflowers. He stood tall in a dark coat scar, softened by the smile that would not leave his face. When the minister spoke the words, their joined hands felt steadier than any vow. When Reed kissed her, cheers burst from the pews, echoing down Main Street like a bell. The celebration spilled into the hotel hall tables, groaning under shared food. Children danced barefoot on the floorboards, fiddlers playing fast. Evelyn and Reed moved through it all together, greeted, congratulated, teased, admired. Yet whenever their eyes met, the world narrowed to just them. Later, as dusk softened, the fairground and lanterns bloomed against the dark. They slipped away to the telegraph shack. The wire hummed faithful as ever. Reed touched it lightly, then turned to her. "You kept the town's voice alive," he said. "You kept mine alive, too." She smiled, leaning into him. "And you showed me some voices are worth sharing the road with." Outside, the night settled warm over Silver Creek, a town no longer just surviving, but beginning to believe in its own strength. Evelyn and Reed stood together, listening to the hum that had first bound them, and knew the line between them would never break.